It wasn't easy being black in America throughout much of the 20th century. Every day you had to face the threats of racism, discrimination, segregation, police brutality, and the violence of the lynch mob. But you know what was even harder than being black in America? Being a black communist in America. Angelo Herndon learned this the hard way, and he nearly lost his freedom and his life to stand up for what he believed in. Hey everybody, Professor Moore here, and in honor of Black History Month, I want to share some stories of Black Americans that aren't talked about enough and deserve more attention. Today I want to tell the story of Angelo Herndon, a young black communist who faced down Southern racism in the courtroom and won. Angelo Herndon was born to a poor family in Ohio in 1913, and from a young age he began looking for solutions to the two problems that seemed to plague his family and his people: poverty and racism. At first, he turned to his parents' religion of Christianity and found solace in the church. But as a teenager, he heard a terrifying story that made him realize he could never defeat racism by prayer alone or by turning the other cheek. It was the story of Mary Turner. When a white farmer was murdered by one of his black workers in Georgia in 1918, a white mob went on a rampage in the black community, lynching at least 11 black men. One of them was Hayes Turner, who was hung in public and left there for 3 days, while hundreds of white spectators came to view the body as a sick kind of tourism. When Turner's 21-year-old wife Mary began telling neighbors that she was going to seek legal action against the lynchers, a white mob came to her house to teach her a lesson. It didn't matter that she was 8 months pregnant. The mob hung her by her feet from a tree, doused her in gasoline, and then lit her on fire. When the NAACP investigated the lynching, they learned that a knife was taken and the woman's abdomen was cut open, the unborn babe falling from her womb to the ground. The infant, prematurely born, gave 2 feeble cries, and then its head was crushed by a member of the mob with his heel. Hundreds of bullets were then fired into the body of the woman, now mercifully dead, and the work was over. When Angelo Herndon heard this story, he said, "I felt like moving heaven and earth to bring the guilty to justice." Herndon realized that Christianity alone could not solve the problems of racism, so he continued his search. And in 1930, at the age of 17, he believed he had found the solution: communism. Herndon's conversion to communism came after listening to a communist speaker at a political meeting. He was shocked to see a white man condemning the practice of lynching and calling for the death penalty for all lynchers. Herndon was mesmerized as he listened to the speaker explain that it was capitalism that was the source of both poverty and racism. The speaker declared, "Friends and fellow workers, it is estimated that throughout the country there are 17 million unemployed workers. Through no fault of their own, they have been thrown out of the steel mills, factories, coal mines, and other industries to lead a wretched and tragic existence, while the Wall Street bankers are wallowing up to their necks in wealth that you and I have created. And here in the South, conditions are even more deplorable. Negroes are discriminated against. They are given the worst and dirtiest jobs and are paid less for the same work done by a white worker. They are segregated into disease-infested neighborhoods. They are denied the rights of citizenship. They are lynched and terrorized in open violation of the United States Constitution. Why must this be? The bosses tell the white workers that they are superior to the Negroes, but can't you see that your conditions are the same as those of the Negro people? Thousands of white workers are today unemployed and suffering just as the Negro. Can't you see that those who teach you about white superiority are not only the exploiter of the Negroes, but they play one worker against the other and rob you and starve your children? If you want to improve your conditions, your ranks have to be united." After the speech, Herndon said to a friend, "He's right. He does nothing but tell the truth. He's the first honest white man I've seen." After that speech, at the age of 17, Herndon joined the Communist Party. The next year, he started his career as a political activist by working to mobilize white and black workers in the South. And it didn't take long for Herndon to run into trouble. In 1931, Herndon was arrested in Alabama and charged with trying to incite an insurrection for handing out pamphlets like this to white and black workers, calling for their solidarity against capitalist exploitation. The trial got off to a horrible start. On the very first day, Herndon noticed that the local chief of the Ku Klux Klan was sitting in the front row of the spectator section, surrounded by fellow Klansmen. When his lawyer called for Herndon to be acquitted, the racist in the audience yelled, "The bastard should be lynched." From the way the judge acted, he might have been a Klansman too. When he announced that Herndon was guilty of trying to incite an insurrection and sentenced him to a year on a chain gang, he added, "I am only sorry that we haven't got an insurrection law here in Alabama as they have in Georgia, so we could have your neck broken in the courtroom without delay." After he was released, Herndon continued his work in Georgia, where he led a march of 1,000 unemployed black and white workers. And once again, in 1932, Georgia authorities charged Herndon with trying to incite an insurrection. Luckily for Herndon, a lawyer came to visit him in jail to offer his services. The 29-year-old Benjamin Davis Jr. was a black lawyer with little experience. In fact, he had never tried a case in court before, but he had the right kind of attitude to win over a radical like Herndon. Davis agreed with Herndon that one of the key issues in their defense should be the exclusion of black jurors in Southern courtrooms. Davis's opponent in the trial was the prosecutor Reverend John Hudson, who never tried to hide his racism. At one point, Hudson asked a defense witness, "Would you want your daughter or sister to marry a Negro?" The question had no bearing at all on the case and showed that the real issue was black people's right to their humanity. One of the most shocking moments of the trial came when Hudson asked a police officer if Herndon had been in possession of communist literature. The officer replied, "Yeah, I got it from that N-words room." Davis was furious and objected to the use of the term, arguing that it was prejudicial and insulting. The judge overruled the objection and said, "I don't know whether it is or not." As a compromise, the judge instructed the witness to not use the N-word and instead use the word darky, which he said was a term of endearment. Davis objected again and was overruled. Later, when Herndon's case reached the Supreme Court, they ruled there was no prejudice attached to the use of the term darky as applied to Negroes in a court of law. After this episode, it was pretty clear how the trial would end. After a short deliberation, the jury found Herndon guilty and sentenced him to 20 years on a chain gang. In his closing statement, Herndon declared, "You may do what you will with Angelo Herndon. You may indict him. You may put him in jail. But there will come thousands of Angelo Herndons. You may succeed in killing 1, 2, even a score of working-class organizers, but you cannot kill the working class." After spending 2 years in prison in 1935, the state appeals court overturned Herndon's conviction. Then the Georgia Supreme Court upheld it, leading to a tense 2-year period waiting for the final verdict to come down from the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1937, Angelo Herndon finally received the news he had been waiting for. By a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court overturned his conviction and ruled that Georgia's insurrection law was unconstitutional and went against the freedom of speech promised in the First Amendment. Angelo Herndon was finally a free man. Herndon continued his communist activism throughout the 1940s, but he eventually left the party and settled down for a quiet life as a salesman. Herndon died in 1997, and today his remarkable story and life lives on in his autobiography, Let Me Live. The story of Angelo Herndon is the story of fighting back against Southern racism. It's the story of thousands of Americans joining this fight to call for true justice. And it's a story that we should all remember today, because that fight is not over.